Thank you, Zoom. All right. So first, I do want to thank our event sponsor, Business Health Trust. They've been a huge partner for the duration of this series and continue to support the work that we are doing. And now we'll move on to our first speaker. So we're joined by Karissa Braxton, who's Director of Communication and Strategy at the Seattle Office of Economic Development. And she's going to start us off by talking about some City of Seattle specific commercial rent protections that were in place during the COVID-19 state of emergency and now will be ending. So it sounds like there's a grace period for about 6 months. So some protections will continue during that time and then they'll all sunset. So Karissa is going to give us all of the specifics. I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you so much, and good morning, everyone. As was just mentioned, my name is Karissa Braxton, the Communications Director for the City of Seattle Office of Economic Development, and I'm just here to provide a little context around some of the changes that we are seeing now that the city has ended the civil emergency in alignment with the governor in the state of Washington. And so one thing that I want to say is that I am not an expert in everything. So if there are additional questions that you might have, please feel free to reach out to me directly, and I'd be more than happy to connect you with somebody in my office or find the answer that might meet whatever your specific need is. I believe I just saw a link in the chat that was just sent that is going to take you directly to one of our blogs that we put up, which kind of outlines what I'll talk about today in more detail. And that will also be a centralized place where you can go to check for updates should there be any additional updates that might come from the city or from the state or from the county, as we are also trying to be in alignment with some of our partners. So the long and the short of it is one of the biggest impacts that we're anticipating the civil emergency will have on small businesses specifically is around the issue of commercial rent and some things dealing with particular leases. So many of you may know, and if you do not know, City Council passed an ordinance during the civil emergency that provided specific protections for commercial tenants, for small businesses, and for nonprofit commercial tenants to provide additional supports and kind of a safety net as we were all dealing with the financial uncertainty that COVID brought on. Those temporary protections were always meant to sunset when the civil emergency was over, whenever that was. And Mayor Harrell made the decision to sunset the civil emergency officially as of October 31st. That means that the ordinances, some of the COVID ordinances that were put in place also sunset. However, some of these particular ordinances do have kind of a ramp down period. So the one that I'm going to discuss now is very specific to talk about some of the ongoing protections for small business and commercial tenants and the 6-month kind of grace window that this ordinance that council passed still provides. And some of the basic tenets of this, and you'll see me kind of looking down because I have the document on my phone. I want to make sure I'm giving the correct information. So apologies for the disruption in eye contact. But basically the meat of it is that during these next 6 months, so really looking through April of 2023, there's a couple of protections that you all should be aware of. The first is that small businesses and nonprofit tenants that have rent debt or balances that are still owed, that have maybe been backlogged throughout the COVID emergency, or rent debt that is accrued within the next 6 months as of October 31st, you can negotiate a payment plan with your landlord to pay whatever the balance of your rent debt owed is in installments. So that's the first protection, is that within these next 6 months, tenants have the ability to negotiate payment plans based upon whatever the accrued debt is with their landlords, and come to some type of negotiation regarding your lease and regarding whatever rent may still be owed. The second protection is that repayment schedules cannot require small businesses or nonprofit tenants to pay more than 1/3 of the total rent debt on top of whatever the monthly rent is. So for example, if your monthly rent is $5,000 and you owe a backlog of $10,000 total for debt that has been accrued over the COVID emergency, landlords are not to require you to pay that monthly $5,000 rent plus more than a third of that total debt that still exists in any monthly payment period, unless the tenant and the landlord come to some type of agreement that that payment plan um, does in fact work for the tenant. So if you do have the cash flow to pay more than a third of your debt in any given month on top of whatever that monthly rent is, then that would have to be a decision that is mutually agreed upon between a tenant and a landlord. Additionally, landlords are not to charge late fees, interest, or other charges to any accrued late payments within 1 year after the termination of the civil emergency. So between October 31st, 2022, October 31st, 2023, any rent debt that has been accrued, landlords are not to be charging interest or other fees or other penalties to that balance that is owed. Additionally, rent that is paid in accordance to the payment schedule should not be considered overdue under the terms of whatever your lease is. So anything that you pay back should not be considered by your landlord an overdue payment that would be in conflict with the details of a lease. Additionally, nonprofits and small businesses are able to provide a written offer for an installment payment schedule that is consistent with the tenets of the ordinance that I'm talking about. And in our blog that's actually linked in the chat, it provides a direct link to the specific ordinance so that if you want to read through the details of that ordinance to better understand like what are the protections that maintain, please do so. But the long and short of it is tenants are able to provide their landlord with a written offer for an installment payment plan. And if a tenant and the landlord do not agree on the payment schedule that is offered by the tenant, then the tenant should not be deemed by the landlord to have failed to pay rent that is due if they are paying in accordance to that payment plan that is rendered. So for instance, if you provide your landlord, I can pay the backlog in addition to my regular monthly rent in this type of payment schedule for whatever reason, mutuality is not agreed upon, but you are paying in accordance to what you provided as a written offer, then your landlord cannot claim that you are failing to pay back the rent that is owed. And it's a little bit confusing, but I think the intent here is to provide as much cushion and protections for tenants as possible so that landlords are not coming asking for a lump sum all at one time, even if you're offering to provide some type of installment payment plan. And then finally, important to note is that back rent should be paid in full by October 31st, 2023. So again, giving people a year, so to speak, to pay that back rent. If there are businesses that within these next 6 months, so through, I think that's April, that are still accruing debt for whatever the circumstances of their business is, these protections of this ordinance still apply. A couple other things that I want to go through really quickly. Again, the reason why these protections are being lifted is because they were designed to sunset when the executive sunsetted the civil emergency in the city of Seattle. That is not to say that we are under the assumption that businesses and nonprofit tenants are not still dealing with the financial burdens that COVID created. So we do understand that folks are really still struggling financially, that people are facing back rent and things of that nature. And so we understand that, and that's why this grace period and these protections are very important to support businesses and nonprofits as we kind of transition in the next iteration of our response to COVID. Another thing that we want to make sure people know is that if you have incurred back rent, then you do not have to pay your full balance all in one lump sum like today. So landlords should not be requesting full payment or putting you at risk of eviction immediately. That's where those protections for lease negotiation and rent negotiation really come into play. The Office of Economic Development, one of the tools that we're really leveraging that we have, unlike some of the funding that went towards rent relief on the residential side, we do not have rent relief in the forms of funding for commercial tenants. However, we do have a contract with our partner, Communities Rise. Communities Rise has been working with us for the last 2 years to provide different type of legal support and education for commercial tenants, businesses and nonprofits. And our contract with them right now provides additional support when it comes to lease negotiation. So if you connect with Communities Rise, that allows for you to get, I believe it's 10 hours of free one-on-one legal consultation so that you can look at the particular circumstances dealing with your commercial lease, figure out what are the tools and resources that you need to meet your particular circumstance. And they provide different legal advice and resources to help you negotiate lease payments, negotiate other elements related to your lease with your landlord, so that hopefully the ultimate goal is that people are not displaced, or people are able to pay back whatever rent it has been incurred over the duration of the pandemic in a reasonable and mutually agreed upon timeline. So I truly encourage everybody to check out Communities Rise. There is a lease amendment toolkit with templates, legal templates that people can access. Again, you can get direct consultation to work with one of their I think they're lawyers, but work with one of their staff. There's also online videos that provide some education services. And there's just a myriad of other resources that they have available so that you can navigate whatever the particular circumstances are related to your commercial lease in the relationship with your landlord, should this be an issue for you. Additionally, Communities Rise does have capacity to support business owners and nonprofits in languages other than English. So right now, they offer services in Spanish, Igbo, Chinese, and French. For additional language support, they do use Voyant's live translation services and other forms of kind of translation and interpretation services. Additionally, the City of Seattle Office of Economic Development, we have relationship with community partners that provide language access supports as well. So business owners, nonprofit leaders can always reach out to OED, and we can connect you with our community partners that can assist people in language, because we want everybody to have equitable access to the information that they need. Some other things that I'll just kind of mention that is also impacted are some of the protections that were put in place around gig workers. And so the Office of Labor Standards, they're the ones who really drive this work. However, we thought it was important to also couple that with the information we're providing around lease support, because there are workers who are part of that gig economy, and we want them to understand what protections still exist for them. And so in the blog that is linked in the chat, there is all of the details related to what protections still exist for gig workers. Similar to the lease protection supports, there is a 6-month grace period. Again, we didn't want the ending of the civil emergencies to have kind of like an immediate shock on people. And so there's a 6-month grace period. And in that blog post that is linked below, you will see all of the details related to how ordinances around supporting gig workers are impacted by the ending of the civil emergency. So long and the short is, if business owners and other nonprofit commercial tenants are facing issues around rent debt, are facing challenges or issues around their lease, or you're more generally curious about how this might impact your lease if you don't already know, one of the first steps that I would definitely take is to check out our blog post that's linked in the chat, and then also reach out to Communities Rise directly and take advantage of some of those legal services. Um, that they offer that is very specific to dealing with the issues of lease negotiations and commercial leases. And then lastly, before I open for questions, if there are any, I would definitely take a couple of minutes to read through the ordinance. It's only about 2 pages, just to fully kind of conceptualize like what are the ongoing protections that business owners and commercial or nonprofit commercial tenants should know still exist for them, so that you're navigating these circumstances with your landlords appropriately and you still get the benefit of the protections that are at play. So thank you. And if there's questions, I'm happy to try to answer them now, but if not, you can always reach out to me via email and I will connect you with the appropriate person.
Wonderful. Thank you, Karissa. That was super informative. There aren't any questions yet from our attendees, but I had a couple. First off, and you maybe said this at the very beginning and I missed it, but could you just confirm what is considered a small business under this order or these regulations?
From the council's side or like from OED's side?
From your side.
From our side. There is not consensus in the city of Seattle what a small business is, but typically the range that we're looking at are businesses and firms that are about 50 employees or less. They typically fall within the range of a small business. If there are folks who have more than 50 employees, I would just encourage you to just reach out to the Office of Economic Development, and one of the business advisors would be able to kind of work with you one-on-one just to ensure that that the services by Communities Rise would still apply to you. You can also go online to their website, as well as our website, and kind of read through some of the eligibility and criteria. But typically that's about the range that we're looking at, so that we can have the deepest impact with our limited funding.
Okay. Great, thank you. And then my other question, and just a reminder, if you have a question for Karissa, pop it over in the Q&A. But if a small business owner is in a dispute with their landlord or thinks that their landlord is not following the rules in this grace period, should they reach out to OED or go directly to Communities Rise for that legal support?
I would suggest that folks reach out to Communities Rise probably first, if it truly is a matter of like legal dispute. However, you can also reach out to the city, because if businesses are not adhering to some of the ordinances and laws that the city has put in place, then there might be a role for the city to play to help mitigate that situation. But if it's a situation where you kind of need some legal advice about how to navigate, I think that they are a great resource. But you can always reach out to the city and we can work with business owners to figure out what's the appropriate path forward.
Okay. Wonderful. Thank you. Well, I don't see any questions, and all of the resources are linked in the chat, as she mentioned. So hopefully everyone's set, but your email address is in the chat too, and they can reach out with any questions after the event. Thanks,
Perfect.
Karissa.
Thank you for having me.
Bye. All righty. So moving on to the second half of our program. We are going to hear from Craig Blackwood, who's Assistant Director of the Division of Occupational Safety and Health at Washington State L&I. And he's going to be talking to us about the safety regulations that are continuing to be in place for businesses, even with the end of the COVID-19 emergency orders. So Craig, I will hand it over to you.
Thank you. Can you see me? I'm not seeing myself. Oh, there I am. Okay.
You're good.
Thanks. All is good. So thank you, everyone. And before I talk about some of these safety requirements that continue on after the governor lifted his order on October 31st, I always like to start out meetings with business associations, letting you know that we do have a free consultation service for all your occupational safety and health needs. In addition to traditional safety and health assistance, we also have risk managers who can help kind of connect your bottom line of safety to your workers' comp rates, and they can do all kinds of good and exciting stuff for you. So if you haven't heard of them, now you have. If you had, great. Hong Bin, who is here with me, she is our industrial hygiene consultation supervisor who has staff in the King County area, and she will put her information in chat for whomever would like to follow up, and you could learn more about that. But please take advantage of that service. They've been very busy helping through navigate through COVID, which has not been easy for anyone. Seems like the daily changes the last couple of years. So things are a bit more stable now. So the two things I'm really going to talk about are HELSA, the Health Emergency Labor Standards Act, and the legislation on voluntary use of personal protective equipment. So these pieces of legislation passed early in the pandemic, and L&I, as a result of that legislation, we had to come up with some specific rules. But one of the keys in both pieces of legislation is they're enacted during a public health emergency, either at the state level or the federal level. And so in this case, the governor lifted the emergency order on October 31st in the state. However, there remains a national emergency order in place that the president has put in place. He renewed it back in March, and if there is no renewal of it or no ending early, it automatically sunsets on March 1st of next year. So basically, when October 31st came along and the state order was lifted, the actual main change from some of the governor mandates for safety and health was some of the non-state employee entities that had vaccine requirements no longer do. Hong Bin and I, as state employees, is now a condition of employment, which is a different approach. But contractors and K through 12 and some of the others who are required to be vaccinated at one point, that went away. So what didn't go away is HELSA, and so the stuff that you might have heard before is still in place. If you have an outbreak, well, first, if you're 50 or more, so there's an employer size in the law. If you're an employer of 50 or more employees, you are required to report outbreaks of 10 or more cases of COVID. And our rule actually outlines how you count that, because there's some criteria. When do you start? When do you end? And again, we have that in our rule. And I think I saw, Lee, that you had something for your members that actually outlined that fairly well. But again, you can go to the rule to get more specifics. So outbreak reporting, and we still continue to get a lot of those reports coming in. The other thing that hasn't changed on the safety and health side is, regardless of what size employer you are, if there's a positive case in the workplace, you have a 1 business day or 24 hours, depending if you're healthcare or non-healthcare, to have a written notice to workers and contractors who are potentially impacted because they were working in the same area. So that continues on. So again, nothing there is different than pre-October 31st. The other thing with health, so there is some non-safety and health stuff, but there's some claims information in there. And so I'm going to share some information on claims with a caveat, this is not my area, safety and health is. If there's a lot of question on claims or energy around that, I did let my counterpart who oversees our industrial insurance section know that I'd be speaking about this today. And if you want more specifics, you might want to consider inviting him to a future webinar, because again, I won't be able to answer a lot of questions, but I am going to share with you what he has shared with me regarding HELSA. And kind of Karissa, I'm going to break eye contact momentarily because he sent it to me in writing. So within HELSA, there is a presumptive coverage part of HELSA, and that presumptive coverage remains aligned with the presidential public health emergency healthcare or emergency order for healthcare workers and frontline workers. And so that, as I said before, is scheduled to end on March 1st of 2023, unless it's extended or ended sooner. And so the presumption part of HELSA still remains. If you're healthcare frontline workers and get COVID, there's a presumption it comes from work. And there's another issue he thought you might be interested in, and this is not HELSA related, but something the department has done, is they plan to continue to provide financial relief for employers in regards to COVID claims costs. And what that means is they will continue to not include those costs in calculating a state fund employer's experience modification factor or retro-related calculations for any of you who might be in or part of a retro program. Self-insured employers are also being allowed to remove COVID claims costs from their assessment calculations. And again, this is not tied to the presidential order. This they plan on continuing through June 1st of 2023, and then that will go away. And that aligns with some of their quarterly rates and the work they do in our industrial insurance section. And so regarding HELSA, we cover kind of safety and health portions in the claims portions. And the other part that still remains in effect is the anti-retaliation portion for high-risk workers. Like, you can't discriminate or take action against a high-risk worker for looking for accommodations to try to continue working in a healthy environment, whatever that accommodation might look like. And so I'm actually going to pause there before I go to the PPE section, just in case there's any questions on HELSA, because I plan to go to something else. I don't know if you got any questions since I've been talking or not.
I don't see any in the Q&A box yet, so I think you can move on, but just for everyone, remember, drop questions in the Q&A and we will save some time at the end too.
Okay. So the next thing will be a little bit briefer. There was a legislation on the voluntary use of personal protective equipment. Early on in the pandemic, we were doing lots of work, a lot of compliance work, and a lot of issues we ran into early on was certain employers would not allow employees to wear masks. Some of it was they didn't agree politically, so hey, employees in my place of business aren't going to wear masks because I don't care what anybody says. Others said, hey, if you wear a mask in here, we're going to assume you're going to rob the place, and we'll take appropriate action. So we dealt with all of that early on. And so this rule was kind of a genesis of that all employees are allowed to voluntarily to wear masks in the workplace. And I'll talk both about a couple permanent rules we're working on momentarily. But in regards to masking, what has changed there? So there is no longer a governor's order regarding masking. There still is a Secretary of State, Secretary of Health order regarding masking, and that does still require masking for employees and others in healthcare, long-term care facilities, and in correctional facilities where the transmission rate is either medium or high. But that's through a Secretary of Health order, not a governor's order any longer. And so two final things I want to mention. We talked about this legislation, the rules really being kicked in when there is a public health emergency, either at the state or federal level. But some of what is going on that is kind of related to HELSA as well as voluntary PPE. We are in the process early on of developing a permanent infectious disease rule that covers more than COVID. Again, we're in the early stages. OSHA, we're a state OSHA plan. So I really didn't explain that, but when OSHA comes out with a rule, we have to be at least as effective. And they are looking to come out with a COVID and healthcare permanent rule anytime, is what we've heard. But we're developing a larger infectious disease rule that we're not exactly sure what it will look like. But that will be a permanent rule, but it will take into account much of the learning we've had the last couple of years. So when there's a pandemic in the future, hopefully those who come after us don't have to scramble to try to figure out everything we did and the lessons we've learned. And so that's going on. And in regards to the voluntary use of personal protective equipment, we are also in the initial phases, and this will be much easier than the infectious disease rule, of making a permanent rule. So employees from here on out can voluntarily use a mask in the workplace or other protective equipment, hearing protection, gloves, whatever it may be. Our rules are designed to cover most instances and most people, but they don't cover everything. And so in addition to masks, it was also a good time to say, hey, there's this space that really has gone uncovered. And if you want to wear personal protective equipment, as long as it doesn't create a hazard in the workplace, we want to come out and proactively make that known. And so we are developing a rule in that space as well. And so, Lee, I stop there. That's really proactively kind of what I wanted to share with you and your members. If there's questions or if there's anything else safety and health, it doesn't have to be this. If Hongbian and I are here, we're happy to answer any other safety health questions also, but not a lot of claims questions.
Great, thank you for all the info. So in the chat, I linked to the LNI's COVID information page. So a lot of resources there. And then the chamber also created a toolkit with a summary of some of these that are ongoing after the end of the emergency order. So that's in the chat too. And then we have Hongbin's information in the chat, just calling all of that out. So still no questions in the Q&A box. Attendees, hopefully we'll get one or two. I know you came today for a reason, so let's make sure we get all your questions answered. Let's see, questions from me. I think I just heard you say that there are some additional regulations or rules coming to help clarify some things. Do you have an ETA on those?
Yep. Yeah, in general. So first off, if there's questions afterwards, just send them our way. Because I know sometimes in the moment people might not think of a question, but we're always available for whatever you need. So estimated time on the voluntary use of personal protective equipment, because the rule is going to look very similar to what's already in that legislation. And so that'll be sometime next year. So that's likely. I don't know that it'll be before March 1st when the federal order is scheduled to sunset, but that's a pretty easy lift. Really got to do some minor stakeholdering. Infectious disease is measured in years. That is a ways out because again, this could cover all industries. We're starting with healthcare and COVID, and then there'll likely be healthcare and other serious infectious disease, and then other industries that have infectious disease kind of issues. We haven't really scoped it out yet. So again, that's in the early stages internally. And once we get ready, we'll do stakeholdering and do our typical notices for whomever is interested. And if anybody's actually interested in knowing when that rulemaking is, we can always send links to where you can sign up to get notification. But again, the PPE voluntary rules, you should see that next year. The infectious disease, that's years out. So
Okay.
That's a much bigger lift.
Fair enough. So we do have a question from an attendee. Should businesses continue to track attendance in order to provide notice if there is a possible exposure?
So that is something we don't require that. We just require that notification be given. And so that sounds like a excellent way to know, because if you don't know who's in the area, it's kind of hard to know who to notify without doing contact trace and other things. So since the question, I guess I can see it too. I see little should this. So yeah, I would say if you're doing that, you should continue to do it. We don't require it. We just require you have a way to take care of this, and that sounds like a very easy way to do this. So I'd say yes. We at L&I, we keep track of who's in our building still by badge access. So we do the same thing. So we know who's in the area because we have not been immune to reporting of COVID cases because we've had some ourselves.
Mhm. Okay, let's see. So when you say reporting, that means reporting to the other employees who may have been exposed and notifying public health if the outbreak is large enough?
Yeah, so the two notifications, to be clear, the direct notification, either 8 hours or 24, or I think it's business day or 24, depending on your healthcare or not. Well, that is just a notification from the employer to impacted employees and contractors. That's all that is needed. Nobody else needs to be notified of that. If you're an employer of 50 or more and you have that outbreak with 10 or more cases, that actually through health has to be reported to L&I. And I think in your handout, you have our 1-800-4BE-SAFE number on there. I think I saw that. And that's where it gets reported. It's the easiest thing. You just call them and they're prepared to take the information. And the reason we do that, because we actually talk with the Department of Health. So we work with them. And so we could share that information and share with them. And early on, some of those outbreaks kind of were early indications we better go actually have some safety and health inspection resources assigned because some outbreaks were pretty big and pretty serious. Now we get a lot of reports still, but usually it's right around 10, and there's nothing super alarming that we see. But again, it is still required.
Okay, thank you. Let me check the box here. No additional questions from attendees yet. So I know you said claims is not your area of expertise, which is totally fair. It seems very complicated to me. But we do have a page in our resource guide about the different types of leave that someone should take or could take. Can you speak to that at all, or should we just direct people to the guide or to the L&I website? Because there's the paid sick leave from your employer, there's paid family medical leave, there's workers' compensation, I guess, that all could be at play. Can you clarify there?
So easy answer is no. Because we discussed those. So we have staff actually do the paid family medical leave. They know about it, but it's really, if I understand, it's not even us who does it. It's through another agency. I can't remember which, if it's Employment Security, I forget which one.
It sounds right.
But
Yeah.
if you, because I looked at the safety and health stuff on your guide, look, all pretty current. So I'm assuming the rest is pretty good as well, to make an educated guess. But Mike Ratko, who was my peer in charge of industrial insurance, who knows all about the workers' comp and some of those other connections. We always have him have a look or connect you with resources there if you have people have questions. But I would not want to try and sort it out because I get it really screwed up for people.
Totally fair. Well, again, it is page, it looks like 4 of our guide that I linked in the chat, and will go out in our post-event email. Great. So one last call for questions from the audience. And I don't see anything. So if you have any closing thoughts, Craig?
So, I guess a closing invitation, not thoughts I've talked enough about. I'm tired of talking about COVID, just in general, because we talk about it a lot. But going forward, I offer leaves. There's other issues on the safety health front that your members are interested in. We're working on wildfire smoke protection, outdoor heat. A lot of stuff is going on that there may be interest. Fall protection is changing. If you have members who have employees who get up on ladders or work at heights. So we are available to talk about any safety and health needs you have, because again, we have a lot of stuff going on. So we're happy to join anytime, whether it's me, Hong Bin, or one of our people who is technical and knows some more details. But, any safety and health stuff, feel free to reach out and we will show up and talk about it.
Great, thank you. So should they, if they have questions on any of those other topics, reach out to Hong Bin directly?
So yeah,
Information
if
in
you
the
want to consult, so definitely Hong Bin is who you want to reach out to. If somebody wants at their employer site, hey, well, we need some more information on what's going on with the rules or this outdoor heat. Yeah, again, you could get with Hong Bin and she could get connected with whomever. She's a really good contact locally, and we really like to connect local with local. That's why we have them for staff throughout the state. So, yeah, so I'd use her for anything. And if it's not a consultation, she can reach out to whomever she needs to help out.
Okay. Perfect. Well, thank you so much for joining us today and sharing this information.
So you're welcome.
All right. So I will, oh, yeah. So I will go ahead and close this out here. Thanks for joining. As I said, I'll be sharing the recording of this and all of the resources I linked in the chat, I'll share out via email after the event. Thank you to Business Health Trust, our event sponsor. And then just a quick plug for the chamber. If you're not a member and you enjoyed the content today, or might be curious about what else a chamber membership could entail, I encourage you to check it out. Our website is seattlechamber.com. All of our membership levels are there with pricing. And we'd love to see you at another event soon. So thank you again and have a great day. Bye-bye.